Okay. Cool. So just waiting for the stream to go live.
Sure thing, no problem.
People to trickle in. We've got the first people joining, so welcome. Wherever you're tuning in from, whether it's on LinkedIn or on YouTube or through our Zoom link. Joining, so welcome. Wow, that was mad reverb. Cool. So I think if we make a start, welcome everyone who's joining. Thank you so much for taking the time this afternoon. Really excited about the session. Promises to be very insightful, discussing the founder journey, and for those of you joining, how you can take your next steps as a founder with the Centre for Entrepreneurs and their NEF Plus program. We've been partnering with NEF Plus for the last couple of years, trying to promote their entrepreneurial program and encourage you guys who are out there on your founder journey to join up with them with their 6-month entrepreneurial program for ambitious early stage founders and scale up talent to receive the network, mentorship, coaching, and skills to take their ventures further. So to date, the NEF Plus alumni network consists of over 350 individuals who've gone on to create over 200 live businesses, raised 220 million in funding, and now have a collective valuation of 630 million. Applications for its April 22 cohort are closing in 7 days on the 31st of March, so get applying. The cohort is already filling up with founders wanting to disrupt sectors ranging from Web3 to the future of work and wellness and beauty. Really excited to be joined today by Ashley Staines. Ash here is a NEF Plus class of 2020 alum, and he is the CEO and co-founder of Volunteero, a platform helping charities save time managing volunteers whilst improving volunteer engagement and retention. Since launching in 2020, Volunteero has bootstrapped to nearly £100,000 ARR and supports 35 charities and 5,000 volunteers. He recently closed a funding round of over £400,000 from angels such as the former founder of Just Giving and many other reputable names, as well as having participation from the Octopus First Check Fund. Ash's story is very much an example of what we champion at Escape the City, and it's in your resilience and pivoting in creative ways. So in 2019, he left the banking sector to join the NEF Plus program in a bid to build the now halted rewards platform DoubleTap. When COVID put a halt to that, Ash sought to solve another big problem that he had faced personally in the world of volunteering. Ash, thank you so much for joining us. That was a very lengthy introduction. Thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, no problem. My pleasure.
So really, I guess the purpose of today was to talk through your story and the story of Volunteero, and how that, how your experience with NEF Plus helped you get to where you are. So I thought we'd start with the story of Volunteero itself and kind of why that started and how you went about doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess you mentioned kind of my previous I was formerly of investment banking. I decided one day that I just wanted to kind of take the plunge and dive headfirst and try and start my first venture, which was DoubleTap. Again, it was a platform to allow businesses to reward their customers for Instagram posts. Essentially, I fell into every kind of pitfall a first-time founder would do, and a solo founder as well. But COVID put the kind of drew the final curtains on that. And so that kind of leads me into Volunteero. So when I, decided, put DoubleTap on pause, I started going to do more of the volunteering I was already doing. So I was already doing something called befriending, which is where you speak to an elderly person on the phone every week just to check in, see if they're okay, and then you kind of filter some kind of report back to the charity. But anyway, what happened was I had more time and capacity on my hands because, COVID lockdown, etc. And I basically wanted to pick up more of these relationships. I felt I could handle 5-10 relationships kind of at least for the next 6 months or so. And I spent a lot of time emailing, calling my charity, trying to make this happen. And I knew for a fact there was thousands of people on their waiting list for this particular service, and it was getting worse because of COVID. And it just baffled me that, there wasn't one single place where I could go to find this information or to kind of make it happen myself, kind of be really proactive as a volunteer. Instead, you had to be really reactive and wait to get stuff from your charity. So it felt like it was a really simple solve for that very one small single use case, which was befriending. And I figured, right, there could be easily a charity side and a volunteer app. And essentially they put out everybody that needs befriending, a little bit about them. Mr. Jones down the road loves movies and gardening, etc., whatever it might be. And then the volunteers can go in and maybe request that, make phone calls through the app and leave quick reports flagging issues. So super basic kind of MVP. Realize, through my double tap experience that this wouldn't be overly complicated. And I pitched it to a guy that I'd met just through networking really in the startup space, a guy called Luca, and he lives in Switzerland, and he basically goes, I'd been trying to get him to work with me in the past, obviously never sold him quite well enough, but this time he goes, dude, look, I also do befriending, this is a problem I face, I'm in, let's get this going. And we got one of his friends from university on board, and we literally, it wasn't there, we didn't start going, right, this is a business, we're going to do something amazing. We were literally just like, we face this problem, we're all got a bit of time on our hands through lockdown, we'd like to do something different, let's just build this, give it to a few people and see what happens. So, our founder agreement was a one-line email, basically, and then we incorporated the company, and that's really where we kicked things off. So, yeah, we built a basic MVP. We gave it to that kind of what I stated it was our MVP, and we gave it to my charity. So I was one of the first volunteer users. After some few initial teething issues, they started to really enjoy using it. They, referred us into a few other charities. And then before you knew it, we started getting like, we really like this. Could it also do this? Could it also do this? So it was very, very organic in the way that we started this. We didn't just go, right, we've got this amazing idea and this is everything it's going to do, and we'll build all of that and then we'll give it to someone. We literally gave the worst thing we could possible to get out the door. And we gave it to them and just kind of saw what the response was. And anyway, so it probably got to, we maybe had around 10 charities and 1,000 volunteers before we went, okay, guys, this is actually a business. This is a problem. We need to think about this, more strategically. And by the end of kind of last year, we had a real full service, should we say, volunteer management, quote unquote, volunteer management solution for charities, because we were having charities were saying to us, we also are doing food deliveries to people, shopping deliveries, prescriptions. How can it work to do this? How can we protect people's, locations? How can they submit receipts and expenses? And there was just so many of these use cases, and we just kept building. And now we can kind of satisfy any type of kind of volunteer charity use case that you can imagine. We've got NHS trusts, we've got hospices, we've got aged UKs, we've got donkey sanctuaries, you name it. We do it. So that's kind of where the story to where we are now. And like you mentioned, just a bit of a kind of point of traction. We are at around 35 charities serving around 5,000 to 6,000 volunteers. It works really well. So charities see around a 15 times ROI in terms of their time savings. They save so much time because they move away from spreadsheets, paper-based systems, etc. And then the volunteers do three to four times more stuff, shall we say. And that's because they've now got that one place where they can go, well, if I've got a week free next week, you just go to Volunteero and you see what's around you and what you can get involved in and what you can do. So yeah, that's about where we're at the moment. And we've just closed our first funding round as well.
That's amazing, and such a amazing journey to have over the last 2 years, especially starting that out of a pandemic. And from what you've described, it all sounds very rosy and that it's all gone very well. But I'm imagining, and particularly maybe going back to Double Tap as well, talking about the challenges you've had to deal with and and pass through those challenges, how you've kind of overcome them over the last few years.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, Double Tap, I did everything wrong with Double Tap, and I'd implore any would-be founders to kind of take a different approach. I had decided one weekend, right, I need to make the jump. And if I don't do it now, I'll still be here in 10 years time or whatever. So I just went in and handed in my notice. That's a no-no. There's that's just not the way to do it. If you've got time on the side where you can start, toying with things, tinkering, networking, that type of stuff, then do so. That's the whole lean startup approach. Sorry about the noise about to come past. But Double Tap, what I kind of learned from that whole journey is it is the resilience. I know it just gets like that word gets thrown around in the startup space over and over again, but it's just so true. If I wasn't kind of resilient and decided to stay the course, I wouldn't be sat here doing Volunteero, super excited with an amazing team, doing some amazing, what we consider at least amazing stuff. I wouldn't be here because I'd have probably bailed, so that resilience element, it just really is important to kind of go through that process. But luckily this is why, I get asked quite a lot, like by people that are in corporate jobs and have an idea, etc. And, I don't know, I'm only doing my second startup and it's hardly like a stellar, knocking it out of the park or anything. But what I would kind of usually say to them is that first step, you may get it wrong. You're more than likely to get it wrong, but at least it'll lead you to the second step, right? And that's the important bit, is most people won't maybe take that first step because you kind of look at it and you think it all feels so unrelatable sometimes, because you'll hear about that startup on a podcast when they're worth $500 million or something, but you rarely get the glimpse into where they were when they were just mucking around on their own or just with a co-founder, not a clue how it's going to work, barely able to get a single user, that type of thing. You rarely get to see the glimpse into that. And so you have this picture of these people as these, well-polished founders who just, super smart geniuses that run these billion-dollar companies. Well, no, they were probably very, very similar to you or I at the start, I imagine, I think I learned, that first step, I learned so many lessons on that. And now I'm going to continue to learn lessons on this one. I hope this one's the one, but if it's not, then, then I'll learn lessons for the next one.
I think what you've touched on there is something that would resonate a lot with our audience. I think you've got people that are perhaps in a career path that they don't necessarily want to continue following, and they have an idea for a startup, but all you see on the other side is this like very polished image of like successful founders. And you've highlighted there that kind of nitty gritty in between that is messy and that is not kind of linear, and that you kind of have to battle through a bit. And I think I guess what we're doing here and talking about NEF is trying to nudge people into that space, but doing so with a program perhaps that provides you with a bit of support and a network around that. So maybe we could just like use that and take a step back and into your decision to kind of join NEF or NEF Plus, and what drove that?
Yeah, so like my decision to join NEF was actually a referral. A friend of mine had done it in the past and taken such value from the network and the learnings that he took from that he said, it's definitely something you should do, because NEF in their structured education, in the courses and things like that, they cover all of these typical points where it's a typical sort of stumbling block, or at least you see as an obstacle. It's not a big deal. Like, how do you incorporate a company? There's the most basic, simple elements, all the way through to, how do you get your first MVP, your first user, product, sales, etc. How do you build a financial model? Like all of these things that are essential that you just see as so out of your realms of understanding, they cover those things. So it's almost like, that was one element for sure. And obviously the networking side of things was really, really important for me. If you're in a corporate space, you're more than likely to have never even dipped your toe into this startup world. You've probably not gone to a networking event. You probably barely know a founder of anything. So where do you go when you've got those questions, and it's a really difficult place to be, I think, because as a second-time founder, I now have this amazing network. I'm on many, many WhatsApp groups. You know the different resources to go to and all this kind of stuff. But as a first-time founder, leaving your corporate job, maybe you don't. And so NEF really helps bridge that gap for sure. And just to give you kind of like a tangible idea, when people talk about an MVP, minimum viable product, what is it, right? Like, and that is in anything. I don't care if you're trying to create a donut business or you're creating some kind of tech platform. There is still, what is your MVP, right? And I think NEF was really good in helping people get to that point. So that kind of 0 to 1 sort of area, because they help you refine down what that MVP is, because everyone still thinks, oh, if it's tech, I need to build the tech. Well, no, you don't. You probably need a basic website and you do whatever the manual stuff in the background is. And that's going to be your proof of concept, So NEF was just kind of very helpful in a lot of those sort of key areas, I think.
Yeah, great. I think that's a really helpful pointer in terms of that MVP. And I know Escape, for example, started as, sending out a weekly newsletter of like exciting jobs. And that was very much the MVP was Dom and Rob sitting around a table, just Googling exciting opportunities. And then it kind of grows from there.
Exactly. Just like Jack's Flight Club. Jack's Flight Club was pretty much the same thing, where a guy wanted to go, wanted to find good deals for himself to go away for short weekend breaks. I think it was. I could be misquoting this, but don't let the truth get in the way of a good story, right? No, but I genuinely believe, and it was essentially an email newsletter that he sent around to his friends saying, look, here's 3 seriously cool deals that I just found.
Right.
And then, that's gone and developed into all sorts, and our bookings platform, everything, I think, and exactly that. It starts with an email sometimes.
Yeah. And so just that, like touching, I guess, embellishing on that value of NEF to you and to your kind of business, like whether it's Volunteero or whether it was Double Tap, are there things beyond the network and the network element that you found useful on an ongoing basis that you apply now as a founder?
Look, I mean, the alumni network's great. I know that's kind of still touching upon the networking side of things, but I can't emphasize the benefits of the network highly enough. 3 of my closest founder friends who I lean on in my biggest times of need, just to have a beer with, whatever, commiserate, share war stories, they're all from NEF, because they understand your pains and your trials and tribulations, etc. So yeah, I really want to hammer down that kind of networking point. Look, another element is that NEF puts on amazing events, right? So you want to go and listen to a super successful founder, like that they're able to put it on. They put on pitch events for their alumni. So another tangible example, 3 of my investors in the last round came from a NEF pitch event. Last year, they gave me the opportunity to pitch in front of CVC, the CVC Capital Partners, who are, a big private equity house who supports them. And we were able to get a £25,000 grant and win their Young Innovator of the Year award. And, that has all come from NEF. So there's plenty of opportunities in addition to, what comes in the year where you get that education, you get that network.
That's I just want to touch on that and then the Alumni Pitch Day in a bit more detail. And could you walk us through like how that works? Was that after you'd been through the program and you were asked to come back and pitch your business, or if you could just like go into that in a bit more detail?
Yeah, exactly. So look, the NEF program, where you're going to be in your stage, you're potentially not going to be investment ready, but it helps kind of take you from, I think this is a cool idea, but, I'm probably going to be that person moaning at the pub saying I came up with that idea for 5 years from now. You don't want to be that person. So NEF helps you kind of go, right, I actually want to take the next steps towards, making this happen. But you may not be, say, investment ready during that period of time. So what then follows on, and particularly as part of the alumni network, is you're offered plenty of different opportunities. Not only do they still put on these events that you can continue to go along to, networking events that are really, really powerful, but also, this is a pitch event. I don't know if it's new or if they're going to kind of continue to do it, but I did one last year and I did one this year. Both of them were extremely beneficial. So you get an email from the NEF team. They tell you, look, this is an event. Would you like to register your interest to pitch, etc.? And you just go from there, really. And, look, being able to be given these opportunities to pitch is also going to just help you in a myriad of other ways, right? Having to learn how to pitch in front of a group of people, you're then going to be super comfortable when you get a one-on-one chit chat with an angel over a coffee, right? So it all feeds in. And my pitch last year, I would imagine, I think is probably infinitely worse than what my pitch is this year. And it's helped kind of, continue on with those learnings.
I guess that's like back to that theme of, you don't go from quitting your job overnight to very successful, polished founder. It's like there's so many stages in between. And it definitely seems like from speaking to you and the team that having a program or the structure that provides in place can be really beneficial in that journey and sort of helping you, as you said, whether it's polishing up your MVP or preparing you to ask for founding, and having that structure in place can be super helpful.
Absolutely, yeah.
But taking a step back, I mean, this is a bit of a broader question, but just whether you have, say, your like top 3 tips for early stage founders. So people that are watching this, not quite sure where to go next. They may be in full-time employment, considering a side hustle. What would your top 3 tips to them be?
Yeah, just okay. First one is just do it, right? Like, just, I know it's the most obvious thing in the world, but like, just stop talking about it, just do it. Like, and I'm not saying just go 0 to 100, invest every one of your last pennies into this thing or anything like that, but just do something towards it, whether it be a survey or something like that. Because in just doing that tiny little thing, it's going to continue to build it in your mind as like, okay, this is legit. This is, and you're doing the work, doing the research outside of it. You'll start to build up that passion, and ideally it leads to a side hustle, right? Which is, you still have the security of your existing job, but you're able to kind of get a bit of proof of concept as you go along the way. So the first one is just definitely do it. The second one is probably, look, if you can, do it as a side hustle, please do. I had you are going to have so many concerns and fears and worries and things in your first couple of years as a founder anyway. You don't really want to add significant amounts of financial stress to that, right? It's actually only going to increase your chances of potentially, failing and having to back out and, go into reverse gear. So look, you have time. Pretty much everybody does. Okay. Unless you are at one of the top law firms where you're sleeping under your desk or whatever it is, you probably have some time to be doing stuff on the side. So make use of that time to the best of your ability and try and make it a side hustle. Because the other thing that we realized, through the Volunteero journey, is, even just every single kind of additional touch point of traction, it doesn't matter how big or how small, it all adds to that story that you're trying to tell when you're going to pitch investors. So if you can kind of fast forward to that without having to leave your job, I bet most people in most types of businesses can. Fantastic, great opportunity. And I guess the other one is network unashamedly, right? Because I've actually seen people come along to startup founder events who are not a founder, but would like to maybe be. And I sit there and I think that's awesome. What better way to kind of get into the mix and start to learn about it? You don't have to be a founder to go to these things. And in this networking, just never say no to a meeting. You don't know what it's going to be. Just kind of chew people's ear off, basically, because Luca came to me from I met a guy, Charles, at one of these events. Okay, we just clicked, we hit it off, and we became friends. And he then said, "You should meet my friend. I used to go to school with him in Zurich. He's a software developer."
Yeah.
We became friends over Zoom for 2 years before we then became, co-founders, which is near enough being married, right? So you never know who is going to be that person, but you can't. It doesn't just happen, right? Everyone always looks for these founder golden nugget kind of stories, and unfortunately they usually are. They're kind of random, but they're random, but they're not random. The one thing they all have in common is that person probably did a hell of a lot of networking before that happened.
Right. And as you said, you still haven't met Luca, your co-founder, after 2 years.
No,
so
I haven't
testament met to what you can achieve over Zoom.
Exactly. Yeah, I haven't met Luca or Kedar, both of my 2 co-founders. I mean, like I said, when we first had to incorporate the company, I had to get a PDF of their passports, and Kedar I'd literally met 2 weeks before or something on Zoom. So he was uncomfortable giving me PDFs of his passport. That was the level that we were at when we first started this journey.
Wow. Well, thanks so much for taking the time again to talk through with us. I wanted to open it up to any questions that the attendees across LinkedIn and Zoom and YouTube might have. So please do drop them in the chat box, and Hillary, my teammate, will be dropping them into us. Really worthwhile taking the time now to ask Ashley anything that you might have about that founder journey or about NEF as a program. We've got one here.
Sure.
So the number one piece of advice that you would have given yourself when you first went from a stable job to building a company, I suspect the answer is going to be don't quit straight away.
Yeah, don't quit straight away. It's hard to narrow it down to one. That's probably one of the bigger ones. Then again, it's hard for me to really stand behind that bit of advice, considering I'm really happy where I am now, and maybe that wouldn't have happened before. So that's a tough one. there's just maybe two others that kind of jump out to me, which are like, I wish I knew this going through, because I had a lot of heartache and anxiety over elements of this, which is one, like, take advice, but try to kind of learn to have a bit of your own gut feel,
Right.
because as an early stage founder, you're incredibly influential. Like, I'll give you an anecdote on this one. With Double Tap, even though it turned out to be nothing, I was at a very close point of giving away 15% of my business for some marketing assistance, like part-time. And I think back and I'm like, oh my God, I didn't have a clue, did I? But you were very impressionable at that start. So, try to take on lots of advice, but, take all of it with some degree of pinch of salt, really, and try and get a trust for your own gut feel. And then the other one is just run your own race. And I kind of try to hammer this one home all the time, because as any kind of startup founder, especially if you're just doing an MVP, which is literally like a survey or a web page or something like that, something quite basic, and you're just getting your first few users or first few visits, I'm like, great, like that's sick. But you, as a founder, you're then seeing on LinkedIn, oh, I've just raised 10 million, a 100 million pound valuation. I've done my Series B. I've just done this, and and it kind of just, like, it can really get you down. Like, just how, Instagram is, from, if you've got kind of, body image issues, it's really can be a negative thing if you're not careful. So just run your own race, and just understand that everybody was there at some point in their journey, right? And really try to celebrate those wins, because, if you've even taken that first step forward, you've done more than 95% of people anyway, and that's just awesome. And just kind of build on that, but try to not look over the fence, because you can't compare yourself with the Series B founder. You can't compare yourself with that person who says he's raised loads of money, or says she's raised loads of money, but actually it turns out, you don't know who her dad knows, or his mum knows, or whatever it is. You just can't know what goes on behind the scenes. So run your own race, basically.
And often they start, like, everyone is trying to solve such, like, esoteric purposes or missions, right? So, like, what you're trying to solve might be very different to another, so it might not be useful to look over the fence and compare.
Exactly, 100%.
We've got one on the Zoom. I love this question, actually, because it's a real challenge for a lot of founders. But how much of a difference did finding a technical co-founder make? You mentioned Luca has a technical background. Was that a big step change for you? And how much did you manage to achieve without one?
Yeah, that's an awesome question. And I wish I could answer this in a different way, but unfortunately, it's made a vast, vast difference. I honestly now don't think I would ever try to start a business without one, if it is something that requires that technical capability. Just because I did the first, so to give a bit of context for the person who asked the question, and thank you for that as well. I started Double Tap, and it was outsourced development. Okay. And you know what? You can get agencies that do a fantastic job, but the one thing they cannot do is test, iterate, right? And that is the one thing that building a tech platform is all about, right? And so, look, they still have their place, but if you can do anything within your power to kind of find a tech co-founder, then do so. Look, most people, if they haven't interacted with tech teams and stuff like that, they don't know somebody. The tech developer market, I know right now, is extremely hard to find anybody, let alone finding someone to take a total punt on you with a crazy, outlandish idea. So where it does have a pace to pay is start and try and do something to prove and alleviate some of that risk. So I found developers to often be quite risk averse. So if you can do anything to prove that there is, validity in your idea, there is a need for this, there is a problem, if you can do anything, that's more going to help you when it comes to trying to bring that technical co-founder on board. So yeah, it's really is essential, to be honest.
I can only imagine, from how you describe the Volunteero journey, of sort of adding functionality as you speak to charities, but being able to kind of close that feedback loop immediately must be so useful in your growth journey.
Absolutely. Yeah, 100%. And look, my two co-founders are just the most awesome guys ever. Not only are they, totally aligned we're aligned mission wise and everything, but they're two of the more talented guys I've ever come across.
Yeah.
And they're fantastic. And even then, I, as a business co-founder, sit sometimes like, oh, can't we just have that ready? Can't we just have that done? Can you imagine if you've got a development agency that you're like, you have to go through the whole specking it out and whatever it is, and that's just not how a startup works. You know, we didn't do any specking out of anything. We have a WhatsApp at the start. We had a WhatsApp group, and we're like, could we do something like this? Yeah, cool. They don't put designs down; they just build it straight into the platform, and then we'll do a bit of a code review, and then we'd release it. That was how it started at the start of the initial bit. But with with an agency, you just can't move at that sort of speed, and they'll all have time slots. So the next time slot you might be able to get of their time is in 8 weeks or something. So it's really disappointing because, you know, on the one side, what we've kind of demonstrated with Volunteero, hopefully, is, you know, what you can kind of, the amazing opportunities that are out there these days. You can build a business just sat in your room on Zoom with a bunch of guys, right? Like it's a bunch of guys or girls. It's an awesome situation to be in. But but the problem is the development side of things is just one of those that I just think now is just, you need it, because there's going to be a team out there who's got that, and they're going to outcompete you.
Yeah, no, that's so useful. And thank you to Nicholas and Aaron. There was 2 people asking the same question. So that perhaps goes to show just how important a point that was.
Hopefully Nicholas and Aaron, one of them's a technical, and they can
exactly.
Yeah, there you go, you're all good.
That's a really good point. Yeah, hopefully one of you guys is tech capable. Another one that's come in is if you have any tips for founders raising money for the first time. That is maybe a bit further down the journey for some people, but still a great question.
Yeah, absolutely. A few tips I've found is try and hold off as long as you can, because again, your kind of traction points can continue to look better. And I cannot tell you what it was like rating for Volunteero with some good traction and proof points versus what it was like with Double Tap. So yeah, leave it as long as you can, bootstrap as far as you possibly can. And that's a great position to be in. Really interact with people before you need money is one of the other ones. So one of our angel investors, Nick, sorry guys, about to have an ambulance go past here and it's going to so yeah, one of our investors, Nick, I just have always kind of respected Nick from afar on LinkedIn. You know, I've interacted with him, commented on his stuff. He's done the same with mine. And this was before I kind of ever needed money, right, or wanted to raise money, etc. And at points I asked Nick for advice, genuine advice, by the way, because everyone goes, ask for advice, but you really want money. Come on, that's quite transparent. If you genuinely want advice, reach out, because the startup ecosystem is just an amazing place to kind of be and interact in. People will give you a helping hand. Like I've had responses back from people you'd never have expected to find a time for you. So try and interact with them beforehand, because you're kind of sharing that journey that you're on before you then share it with them, because it's almost like you give them a bit of their due diligence having been done by giving them snippets along the way. So you can kind of try to interact with people ahead of needing money from them, then that's always going to be a really good place to be. I think those are probably 2 kind of key tips I would have.
Yeah, really useful. And I think that point around startup networks has prompted another question, which is how London-centric have you found your startup networks to be? And has the move to online made it easier for people based outside London to get access to the same resources and opportunities? If I'm not wrong, I think you're based in the northeast of England, so you're probably a great person to answer this question.
I used to be.
Okay.
But interestingly, like there is startup scenes popping around everywhere. So when I was in the northeast in Sheffield, like there's a cool sort of startup scene popping up there. There's a really, really good one in Manchester, you know, and everywhere kind of. So if you look hard enough, you'll find them wherever you are. If you're kind of outside the UK, so much of the stuff is now online that I believe, you know, you can kind of really get a foot in the door without needing to be actually in person and go along to these events. So yeah, I actually think outside is you're just as well off being outside of the UK as you are inside of it, to be honest with you. And I think you're kind of seeing that, you know, people have got dev teams that now have one person in, you know, wherever it might be, Poland, one person in Portugal, you know, like is also spread out now, and I think the kind of ecosystem has to satisfy that, particularly with like online events and things like that.
Yeah, perfect. That's really interesting. Man, another question. This is amazing engagement. So clearly, what you're saying has been really resonating with people
Awesome.
on the call. What market research did you do in order to understand how big the problem was that you're addressing? And how do you continue to do market research with your users, who I would assume are the charities and volunteers?
Yeah, look, that's a really, really good question. And I'm going to be a little bit counterintuitive in my response. And I'll tell you what I think you kind of, I think there should be a bit more of a standard mold, and this is what you should potentially try to follow versus what we kind of we did end up following. Well, as I mentioned with Volunteero, it was very organic. And the thing is, we didn't need to research it too much because it was a bit of fun, right? So, and in truth, the irony is if I'd have researched it, I'd have probably not gone down this route, okay? Because there are competitors. Just the fact that the few charities I've ever worked for don't have some kind of system in place doesn't mean that they don't exist. But I was narrow-minded and just assumed that that was the case. But then when I kind of built this, MVP to start along this journey, like I said, if I'd have done a lot of market research, you can get quite scared off by that, and so I think doing too much may not be that valuable, but at the same time, you've got to have a pretty good understanding of what that is. So, I think if I were to do another business, I would probably want to have a pretty good understanding, like you said, of that problem. And the most important part of that, and I think, people may have heard of various books, but the mums test is a very good one for this one, which is essentially like, if you're doing market research, don't go to research projects and things like research papers and things like that, because it's all very tangential. Does it really mean anything necessarily? Like, go to the actual person who you're going to be servicing, who's going to be your customer, who's going to be your user, and genuinely speak to loads of them. And try to avoid them being your mum, which is the point of the book, being your mum or your friends or whatever it is. Because guess what? They just want to support you, and they're going to say what you want to hear, and that's not valuable. You really want to go get this idea of yours kind of torn to pieces as much as possible before you go ahead and do so. But yeah, on the competitive landscape one, I guess just like, don't be wary if there is another competitor, right? Like, in this day and age, as much as you might think you're the first one to come up with some idea, you're just not. You just really are not. And so either someone's tried it before and failed, good, find out why they failed and tried not to, or they exist and you need to figure out why they either don't have that penetration that you never knew about them, or why they're not good enough, because then at least you go in with your eyes wide open. The last thing you want to be is trying to raise money and people go, well, look at these guys, tell me why, because you're just going to look like a bit silly, and you're going to feel, a little bit disheartened by that whole approach. So yeah, I think there's a balancing act between market research and maybe too much. I'd say conversations is more important.
Right. So on an ongoing basis, it's more of like a conversation with.
Yeah, look, I think honestly, the ongoing stuff sort of handles itself. The minute you've got users, guess what? They're not going to shut up. Like in the nicest way possible. If they want something, or they've got an additional problem that needs solving that makes sense, like, they're going to come to you for it. But that's actually an interesting one that I sometimes think about, is one of the things, because one of the questions I think you guys had before, which was like, what's the kind of the challenge we faced at like maybe Volunteero, which is getting pulled in numerous different directions, right? And that is sometimes the problem with users, because they'll come back and they'll say, oh, it should do this, but it doesn't make sense. It's not really in our wheelhouse. It's kind of that, maybe you're doing volunteering and they want it to be able to pay out their volunteers, and that's kind of payments and account management and whatever. It just doesn't make sense necessarily. So you'll find yourself pulled in a million and one different directions. You need to be quite razor focused on what you need to achieve and where you need to be. So yeah, that's one thing about those conversations. You've just got to take those with a pinch of salt as well.
Yeah, that's a good segue into another question, probably last couple of questions, if you don't mind, but from Aaron. Aaron, again, clearly really maxing out his time. But as a CEO, like, what does I'd say a normal day look like for you? I doubt there is normal in the startup ecosystem, but what does a normal day look like for you, and what are your core responsibilities?
Well, you may notice the tan. You see, I just spend the time on the beach. No, what does a normal day look like? That's a really, really good question. And oh God, it's such a cop-out answer to say there isn't one, isn't there? Yeah, look, I mean, look, I'm a CEO of a 4-person company, right? So I'm not going to give that, that is almost seems embarrassing to put that label on it at this stage. So at this early stage, it is literally everything. Like, you're just kind of getting involved in what you can. You're probably still holding some of the sales process with some of the stuff. You're dealing a lot with the kind of tech guys for the roadmap side of things. So yeah, it really, honestly, it just varies very much from day to day. The most important thing, I think, as the founder, or at least as the CEO, is just that prioritization stuff. Like, because I tell you what, I find a lot at the moment is there's stuff I like to do, which is, for example, I still like to be talking to clients, talk to new clients, talk to my existing clients. But there's like these 3 big things that I just know are super important for us. And I'm the one that has to get them done. And I'm just kicking the can down the road, So it's kind of really important to, be really brutal with yourself and say, well, where is my time best spent, and where can, somebody else fill in the gaps here? So I think that's kind of particularly important. And I mean, I'm really intrigued to see where the role goes as you build out the team, but I already see where it's going to be when we're going to be maybe 8 or 9 people soon. And I think a big part of that is going to be, people talk about this culture and instilling culture and what do you do? And I think it is the responsibility of that founder is to be checking in with everybody, even with your co-founders. I just had an hour and a half just chinwag with my co-founder earlier, and I know he had gained a lot of value from that, because you always spend so much time talking about work, and it feels like you're always asking for stuff from them and vice versa. I think a CEO's founder is just a CEO or founder's responsibility is really just to make sure everybody's happy and enjoying themselves.
Nice. That's a really nice way to round off that answer. One final question just before we let you go, and thank you again to the audience for being so engaged with Ash today. If someone is considering several programs, including NEF, what advice would you give them?
Yeah, good question. I would say try to just do a bit of your own due diligence, really. And that could just be a case of, if you manage to get an opportunity to speak to one person who was on either of them, then that should at least hopefully give you a little bit more information to go off of, and make sure you just understand the program and what you're getting yourself in for, because I think sometimes there is a misinterpretation of what you're getting yourself in for. Is it some kind of incubator? Is it an accelerator? Is it just an educational program? So, just make sure you don't find yourself halfway through and like, oh, God, totally, didn't expect this, or this wasn't what I thought it was, or whatever it is. So yeah, just make sure you're kind of fully aware of what those various different programs offer you, and try and have a chat with a few of the founders, and or a few of the people that are the alumni, and they'll probably give you a fairly good indication of how they felt it was.
Great. Well, Ash, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time taking this 45 minutes to talk us through your journey and to answer all of those questions. To the audience, you can find links to Volunteero and to the NEF program. Again, their applications close on the 31st of March for their April cohort. So you'll find a link in the Zoom or in the LinkedIn comments to link through to that program. Links to, as I said, Volunteero and Escape the City in there as well, if you want to find out more about our respective businesses. But yeah, Ashley, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. And thank you everyone so much for joining.
Jake, can I just do one quick one?
Of course.
By the way, we're hiring in case you happen to be a seriously cool, talented software engineer or a business development rep. So if you happen to be that or want to be one of those, do feel free to give me a shout.
I think Ashley's LinkedIn is in the comments as well. So that is a great lead into asking for a job. Perfect. Thanks, Ash. Thank you so much.
No worries. My pleasure. Thanks for having me. Thanks for the audience as well. Cheers.